All right, sir, thank you so much. Is this group ready for a start? We'll make a record, we'll start 1 minute ahead of time.
Uh-oh.
That could be a problem.
I think it's kind of like a train leaving the station early, that's,
Not even, but we'll gamble. Can we have a roll call, please?
Okay, Director Slater-Carter,
present.
Director Wilson,
Here?
Director Harvey,
Here.
Director Huber.
Here.
The only statement I have to make
Hold on, I
is,
think we have to say, did we say that Director Boyd is not?
Let me see.
Okay, yes, Director Boyd is not in attendance.
he's in London, I believe.
Yes.
So a little difficult to get
He's
his.
working.
It's 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, he said it was 3 or 5, but he just didn't feel like getting out of bed to be in our meeting. Okay, thank you so much. The only statement I want to make is.
Yeah, it's 3:30.
The only statement I want to make, I get the sentence out, is just count our blessings with the Ventura fires and everything. It's just, kind of blows your mind, doesn't it? So I think we all should just give a prayer to everyone down south going through those firestorms down there. Just want to say something.
Yeah, congratulations.
Absolutely.
So, 2 comments. One is today is December 7th, and we want to honor those who gave their lives and the survivors of Pearl Harbor and the adjoining area in Hawaii. So we want, this is a special day, and we want to honor those people who gave their lives and the survivors also. The second thing I want to talk about is I attended a California Public Utilities Commission workshop yesterday on Van Ness at the state offices, and and I'll send copies to anyone. It's an ongoing issue, and it involves copper communication facilities. So AT&T wants to take away our landlines. Would like to take away our hardwired copper landlines that some of us have, and just have fiber transmission of data and no hardwired landline. And I spoke as a citizen, and other agencies spoke. For example, the disabled, the people in half the counties of this state who majority of people don't have cell towers. Of course, I don't get cell reception in my house either, but half the counties in the state have a vast majority of people who don't have cell tower and internet connections, and they depend on copper landlines. And there are some other problems with getting rid of those copper landlines, and that is that if you get rid of them and just have fiber, the copper, when the power is out and you pick up the landline, electrical impulses go through the copper and you can get service, and it's a really important emergency issue, and also battery. So if you don't have a landline, you have to depend on the internet. If your battery's dead, or if you don't have a way the power is out in your area, and you don't have a way to charge your battery, there's no way of communicating. And landlines are all very, when they're connected, they're very clear. And it turned out there were some people from Sonoma who spoke, who said that the last form of communication that went with the fires were landlines. Everything else went right away. The landlines survived the longest, obviously, because they're hardwired, so to speak. The people who have disabilities spoke. The hard of hearing, the deaf, the mute, the people who depend on, or people who are developmentally disabled and can't depend on complicated computer software like myself, to depend on landlines. So I spoke, and most of the people that were there spoke, to the PUC, who were very responsive to our comments to keep landlines. The AT&T executives were not very happy, and this will be an ongoing thing. So I'll send you this link there'll be further hearings on this issue for AT&T wanting to get rid of copper communication facilities, your landline. Yes?
Would you mind if I added a comment on that that pertains to our business? And that is, we're having this problem from the engineering standpoint, because one of the things that we like to design into our systems for both the water and the sewer is extremely reliable communications. So when the power's out, we want to know what the status of the water service supply or sewer treatment pumping facility is. Is there a public health emergency happening? And copper landlines we have to every site are the most reliable system we have, and we count on it. PG&E has doubled the rates this year, from $60 to $120 per line. So every pump station, every water facility in the state of California, AT&T has doubled the rates for those individual copper lines for business.
Actually, maybe you could all, some of you can join me the next time, the next hearing. The rates were discussed. The fact that AT&T got financial aid from the government to build many of these lines over the last 80 years, and they got aid from the federal government and the state government to build these, and then now they want to get rid of them. So thank you for that point.
If I could add, Clemens, maybe we should, maybe this district, and maybe you could get a hold of CASA and get CASA to send out an alert, and Aqua as well, the water and sewer agencies, to send a note to the PUC, because frankly, public health and safety throughout the state is entirely dependent on this, and if Jim hadn't brought it up, I don't think anybody would have known about it.
Yeah, and we have indeed this discussion. It's ongoing with AT&T and other providers. We switched some of the lines here to voice over IP, the ones that we can, the ones that we can,
Right.
that we don't need in case of an emergency. But as Pippin points out, most of our pump stations, if they're not connected via radio, they rely on actually phone landline use. And it is absolutely the most reliable.
Well, I plan on sending a note and attending hearings, because where I live, when the power's out, I have no cell phone communication. The only communication I have with the outside world is my AT&T hard line, and it's the reason I've
Yeah.
kept it.
Okay, so more to come. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
That's very helpful.
I'll also send you copies of this.
Please, and maybe we can put it on the website as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Next item are oral comments that are not on the agenda. Does anyone wish to speak to us on any item that's not on the agenda? Okay, I'm gonna make a real quick recommendation. We have a public hearing before the consent agenda. Why don't we address the consent agenda first, and then
Okay.
manage the public hearing. So on the consent agenda, we have approved the minutes for the November 16th, 2017 meeting, approved the financial statements for the October 2017 meeting, approved the warrants for December 1, 2017, 4-monthly review of the current investment portfolio, 5, the connection permit applications received, 6, the monthly water production report for October 2017, 7, the rain report, 8, the solar energy report, and 9, the monthly public agency retirement service report for September 2017. Any of you wish to remove any of the items for, if not, can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second, please, somebody?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so the consent agenda is approved 4-0. And now we'll go back to the public hearing, which is review and possible action concerning adoption of the revised master fee schedule. Clemens, you're on.
Yeah, we reviewed the agreed upon rate formulas with the College of the Coast at 2 meetings ago. They are resulting in a rate increase for the solid waste rates in Montara and Moss Beach of 3.25% for 2018. The increase is mainly based on cost increases for stump fees, supply cost, equipment upgrades that Recology needs. And the solid waste fees for 2017, for this current year, I think that's important to understand that the 2017 rates were reduced compared to the 2016 rates by 3.56%. So a higher percent reduction was implemented in 2017. So now we're trying to bump them up close to our Prop 218 limit for garbage fees. So the 2018 fees are established simply through the adoption of the master fee schedule. In addition to the solid waste fee changes, we are looking at the water capacity charges that are now adjusted in accordance with the capacity charge fee study, that was received in July 2017. And as we announced in July, the implementation of the new fees was scheduled for the calendar year 2018, so we wanted to do that in conjunction with opening up the master fee schedule for the garbage rates. So the connection charge report recommended a 5.15% increase in fees. The cost for 5/8 water meter will increase from $16,262 to $17,100. I think it's worth mentioning that we went through a very lengthy process to establish those connection charges, so are now looking at the implementation of those fees. Again, the master fee schedule, if adopted, will be in effect on January 1, 2018. Recommendation is to open the public hearing, consider relevant public testimony, close the public hearing, and adopt ordinance of the Montara Water and Sanitary District restating and amending the master fee schedule.
Okay. So with the approval of the board, I'm going to recommend we open up the public hearing on the proposed action concerning the revised master fee schedule as outlined by Clemens. Is there anyone here that wished to address the issues that were raised for the action concerning the adoption of the master fee schedule?
Close the public hearing.
Okay, close the public hearing. I just opened it.
So-
Let me say that we all received a letter from Chris Tholog today via email. And there was the request to have it included in the minutes.
We will definitely honor that and include this letter into the minutes.
Okay, fair enough.
We also received a letter from Mr. Koenig, I think it is. I'm sorry. So I don't know if you want to address the board, but otherwise, it will also find its way into the record, of course.
If you want to address the board, I'm going to have you come to the speaker.
I haven't received
I
that
don't
letter.
know.
We just received one copy. I handed it to Peter. It's a number of questions. So,
Well, we're open
Could we
to.
get copies for each of the board members?
Yes, you would.
Oh, please.
Yeah, you can.
If you wanted to ask the questions first.
Where are we in the public hearing?
We're still in the public hearing.
Okay, you want to have a speaker on this, yeah,
I'm sorry?
Do I have to speak there? I can speak loudly.
The only problem we're having, we're on TV.
Yeah, for the camera?
Okay, I have a prosthetic foot,
Okay, well then you're fine.
which makes it difficult to stand
Okay.
for a period of time.
Okay.
So I'd appreciate it if you would bear with me.
How's the sound, Steve?
It's fine.
Okay, thank you.
All right, my fundamental question is, why is there an increase in our garbage collection rates? Now, these rates have changed each year for the last few years. Normally rates are only changed once every approximately 4 years, because the calculation of a rate schedule is extensive and costly, and a hearing that is associated with it is time consuming. So what we have here is a district that has been changing the rates every year. Now, I don't know if you have a proper rate of return determined for the ecology people. Now, my questions, I can go. What are the, and they have to do with this recycling that we do. What is the financial benefit, or just benefit, to the Montara Sewer District for recycling? What is the additional cost of the, for the, or to the Montara Sewer District for recycling? What is the current rate of return for ecology? What is the rate of return for it, for ecology, if there is no rate increase? What is the rate of return if there is a stated increase? Why is there an annual increase for ecology? And then I said, normally sewer, water, and garbage districts only file every 4 years. Now, I was head of the California Public Utilities Water Tariffs section years ago. And we had at that time well over 100 water utilities that we evaluated on about a 4-year basis. About 10% of those water districts had sewer districts. So we, garbage districts. So we also evaluated garbage districts. We also evaluated sewer districts at that time.
So if I may, I'm going to have a suggestion here. There is actually a process that is, we've been involved, and it might be really helpful to have you and talk about the process involved, because actually rates for water and sewer and everything actually are evaluated annually. There have been adjustments every year for the last, since the years I've been here. But what might be helpful is just to go through quickly the process that's involved in the rate increases with ecology, because there's actually a pretty detailed involved in how that's done. So maybe perhaps you can address that for us.
Yes. Peter, basically, as Dwight stated, I'm going to address some of the questions really briefly, but the description of the process I'm going to leave up to Peter. So we have a franchise agreement with Recology that for this year, for this rate increase, looks at factors like cost of living increase, for example. And that is simply an agreed upon formula that Peter can talk about. And the process that we have in place looks pretty much like that we are actually receiving the calculations from Recology. We're receiving their audited financial statements, and our accountant now reviews the information that we receive and confirms that there is no error in these calculations and these statements. So that's the basics for this increase. Then again, I think it's important to understand that public agencies usually tend to increase rates on an annual basis simply to keep up with inflation and to avoid rate shock. So an agency that raises rates every 4 years might have to face higher rate increase, and to avoid exactly that. In today's world, most public agencies adjust their fees and their rates annually. Peter?
Yes, no, to piggyback on what Clemens had said.
Peter, can you identify yourself?
Peter Medina with Mays Associates, the district's contract accountant. To piggyback on what Clemens said, Recology and the district have a long-term finance or franchise agreement that stipulates how the rate increase or decrease is calculated on an annual basis. The agreement was laid out, I want to say we're in the last year of a 7-year contract, but every other year is a cost-based increase. The odd years to that are index based, where they really go off of CPI based on the previous rate. But the cost base really is the reconciliation year in which they actually open their audited financial statements, give us the full display of what their costs are, and based on that and the formula given, it's a long convoluted formula, comes out with this is the rate increase or decrease. Your question here, as far as their rate of return, they have their own internal rate of return that they are calculating. We're not necessarily privy to that information per se, but I said the district is responsible for paying their required profit margin, and it's just a part of the deal. And as the board could probably tell you, as well as Clemens, these are just standard agreements that the district is going into the franchise. This is a agreement. If they were to choose another provider, it would be a somewhat similar agreement, is my understanding. But for us, we are given the calculation many months in advance and asked by the district to go over their calculation and to see if we see any glaring holes in it or really errors in their logic or figures and calculations. We do that process, and thus far for 3 years we haven't found any issues. Also too, as far as the increase on a yearly basis, it was just 3 years back there was a double-digit rate increase. That was very controversial. It's upsetting for the ratepayers to see that large of an increase. So the annual nature of it does help for that process, but that year was the major reconciliation year, so it just happened to be that way. So I hope that answers a number of your questions.
Absolutely none of them. Thank you. All right, I'll go a little further now.
I'm gonna
Just
give you
looking-
about 2 or 3 more minutes too, so just consolidate down, please.
All right. When this started, we got these large canisters. I only have one 32 gallon canister. It weighs 30 pounds. It is designed to be lifted by a hoist. They do not have hoists on the trucks that pick up the garbage around my house. They do not have hoists that pick up the recycled material at my house. We have these canisters, these 32 gallon canisters that I have, that is top heavy, weighs 30 pounds, and my garbage weighs about 5 pounds. Yeah, this makes the man, and my house, I'm a single individual there, my house has very little garbage, but it requires that man to pick up a 35-pound container, 30 pounds of container. A standard commercially available trash can weighs 5 pounds, is not as top heavy as that. You can latch the cover on, you keep the critters out of it. No, what has happened is there's been a gross change in the service that we get, in the type of equipment that has been evaluated that was included in this. And I disagree entirely with the way that the district evaluates the cost of the service. You can poke holes in any rate schedule that is produced, that's given to the PUC for evaluation, and that's why they're there. And they're reduced very, very significantly. A big factor with ecology, which is a difficult one to deal with, is the allocation of the costs. And they have their an office in LA. They send their equipment all over the place. Lord knows what it's all includes. So I'd say whatever is in it here is very poor.
Thank you very much.
If I could answer one of Mr. Curdy's questions, and that is about the recycling. In what year was it they passed the mandatory recycling at the state level?
2000, around 2000.
Around 2000. And so every sanitary district is required, or city is required to have a minimum level of recycling. And
50%.
50%. Montara far exceeds that. We do very well in that. And we've been working with Recology for a lot of years on that. And there's many things included, and I've explained this to many people, in your trash rate that help keep the community a clean and healthy place to live. Recology does come when people dump their trash at the end of streets and so on. They actually come and clean it up. That's something that we don't see as folks who live and go out of the community for work and so on. Also, we have our cleanup days. You're able to call Recology and have them take away large items like a refrigerator, washing machine, couch, whatever it is that you need. And the other is that you have access for now things that you used to be able to put in the trash. That's illegal anymore. They're called hazardous waste, and you can't do it. And so you can take it to Pacifica to dispose of that, instead of like the old days, like the really old days where you just pour it in the road to keep the dust down, the oil and stuff. So there are a lot of services that are provided by Recology that are not seen just when you pick up when you drop your trash can at the street. But in fact, the recycling is a state mandate, and they do audit those.
Now, this is under the Waste Management Act of, it was actually adopted in 1989, and it's in Public Resources Code, Section 40,000. The main point here is that there's a statutory requirement to divert waste from landfill, and that's where recycling comes in. And so there's a goal, an annual goal to be met. And I think this area...
We're meeting, yes.
Me too, yeah.
We have met it from the beginning.
Yeah. And this is in accordance with the local plan, waste management plan.
And one of the other costs that is in here is the cost of going to Ox Mountain. The county no longer controls the rates at Ox Mountain. It used to until, I don't know, 5-10 years ago. It's now, those rates are now controlled by Allied Waste, Waste Management, whatever it's called this year. And they are extraordinarily high. Our experience is when we take trash to the dump and go up to South City, it costs about half of what it will cost us to go to Waste Management. As for individuals. So that's a cost that we all have to absorb. And again, we can thank the Board of Supervisors for giving Waste Management a free rein on that.
Wait a second, it's not Waste Management.
No, Allied Waste, what is it
It's
called?
Republic.
It's Republic now? They keep changing the name, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
I actually have a question. You say that it's hard to lift that you're talking about this gray container, correct?
Yes,
Okay, it has wheels on it. You're not able to roll it,
yes, they have the wheels on.
but you're not able to use those wheels to roll it to the curb?
But yes, you can roll it on that. But
Yeah.
it's pointless. The wheels don't roll up into the truck. The truck driver has to pick up the load.
Yeah, now the one thing, and Clemens, back me up if I'm wrong here, or tell me if I'm wrong here. Recology actually requested, one of the reasons for going to that standardized container is for the safety of their worker.
Yes.
For workers' comp claims too, it keeps our rates down.
Yeah. So,
They're going to be putting those lifts in on their trucks, starting next year, and this is why they're changing us to the different green waste containers too. And I'm not happy about that either.
Okay, so I'm gonna do a process this year. What I'd like to do is actually, we've gotten your feedback, so thank you very much. And what I'd like to do is close the public hearing and then bring the discussion to the board. So, unless there's anyone else who wants to present to the board in the public hearing, Hearing none, I close the public hearing, and now we'll bring the discussion to the board. So Jim, I know you said.
Two things. One, they do have a hoist for the blue recyclable cans. There is a hoist. They do have a hoist for that. There's not a hoist that I can see for the trash. I guess if the trucks had a hoist for the trash, we'd have to pay for it. But I don't know, but there is a hoist for the recycle cans.
Some routes have.
Some routes have, okay.
Have also
I guess
for the
they're
grant.
working. And the other thing is, I'm not familiar with the terminology of rate of return, but with this last cycle of increases that we started a couple of years ago, didn't we do an audit on recology for this particular area, audit of their books to
Well,
see?
we reviewed
We
the
reviewed.
independent audit
Okay.
that they produced.
Okay, so there is some checking on the rates and why they're so, and also, the third comment is that our rates are much higher than our are much lower than our neighbors, have always been much lower. Now they're not hugely lower, but they're still lower than our neighbors. So, I think that's a fact. So our rates, we have had increases, but they're still lower than our neighbors. And the history is that they've been much lower than our neighbors.
Actually, I think they're 24% lower than Half Moon Bay.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure where Granada is, because
Yeah.
I think they actually have a decision on this coming up
Yeah.
next week. So I don't know how that skews
And-
things.
So anyway, that's an important point.
And Half Moon Bay has not yet implemented the rate increases from its new contract that it is signing with the, whatever name, trash company.
Any other comments from the board?
Yeah, I have a simple statement on this whole thing. We are in a unique situation that we have a large number of private wells within the district, both in the urban and rural areas.
Oh, you're changing subject. You're on water now.
But it's still part of that.
Okay, we were on trash, so I'm just trying to.
Okay,
Well, there's actually
they're
two parts.
combined together.
There's actually two parts of this. One is there's two rates changes in
Yeah.
here, so go ahead.
Okay, so we are in a unique situation that we have a large number of private wells within the district, both in the urban and rural areas. We have made some major progress in addressing the needs of well owners within the district by eliminating the requirement that they shall connect to the system. There's still work to do. How do you fairly and equitably enable well owners to connect to the system if they so choose? Compounding this question is the fact that many wells were drilled simply because of the moratorium and the fact that there was no other way to build a new house than to drill a private well. Keep in mind that in many cases they have been paying both property taxes and a general obligation bond assessment for a significant amount of time, and in many cases since the founding of the district. A fee on new construction for the purpose of connecting to the system seems perfectly justifiable. Although a fee for well owners to connect is also justifiable, it requires some offset or fee reduction to acknowledge the fact that they have been making payments on the general obligation bonds and property taxes. I am against this water capacity charge for two fundamental reasons. One is that a case has not been made that we need to increase the capacity to accommodate anticipated new connections. Without going into great detail of this analysis has been done that is based on 600 new connections. From my perspective, this figure is pulled out of thin air and bears no relationship to anything. We don't have a need for a water capacity charge. We do, however, have a justification for seeking a connection charge for those desiring to connect to an established and valuable asset, our water system. This is the problem we should be seeking a solution to, how to establish a connection fee for new construction. Two is that we simply have not addressed the issue of well owners that would like to connect to the system. A fee in their case should take into account that they are members of the district in good standing. The other problem that I have with this resolution is the fact that we are asking it to do two things. Deal with a solid waste fee adjustment, and a water capacity charge. I am fully in favor of the solid waste fee increase. I am not in favor of the water capacity charge. If I have to vote on the resolution as presented, I will need to vote no.
Anybody else? Okay, we need a motion on the,
Ordinance.
thank you. And this is a motion ordinance of the Montara Water Sanitary District restating and amending the master fee schedule as articulated. We'll need a motion in a second, please.
I'll make a motion to pass the ordinance, the Montara Water Sanitary District restating and amending the master fee schedule.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, so it passes 3-1. Okay, the next item for business is review and possible action concerning receipt of the June 30, 2017 actuarial valuation and adjustment to the contribution rates. Clemens?
Thank you, Dwight. So at the beginning of the fiscal year 15-16, the district adopted a defined benefit plan for the employees. At the time, we received an actuarial report to establish the contribution rates for both the district and the employees based on the current PEPRA laws. At the time, it was decided that the district contribution would be 6.5% and the employee portion would be 8.25%. Now we're looking at this being in existence for 2 fiscal years, and as prescribed by the current regulations, we have to perform a biannual actuarial evaluation. So the current actuarial makes a number of assumptions regarding the discount rates, payroll increases, and mortality. And in addition to those assumptions, the actuarial also takes into account the plan assets that we put into the fund during the past 2 years. And currently the plan shows, the current report shows that the plan is fully funded. So the actuarial now recommends to adjust the employer contribution to 6.92% and the employee contribution to 7.75%. So that means that the adjustment is now designed to continue the current funding level and bring the employer-employee contributions rates to the 50-50 share that was originally adopted in the plan documents. We have Mary Beth Redding with Bartel Associates here, who will be presenting the results of the actuarial study, and Peter's also here for any other questions that might come up. So the recommendation is really to receive the actuarial valuation and authorize the general manager to adjust the employer contribution to 6.92% and the employee contribution to 7.75% in accordance with the actuarial's recommendation going forward. And I do recommend that we actually have Mary Beth explain us what this document really means, what we have in front of us.
You're on.
It's probably best, I mean, the microphone picks up the sound better.
Because I don't think I talk that loudly, so. Is it working? Okay. So I think what I'll do, unless you want me to do something else, is just go really quickly through the valuation report that I think you all have copies of. The rule for pension plans is that we should do an actuarial valuation every 2 years, which is pretty much looking at the status of the plan, its assets, its liabilities, and truing it up to take account for what's now reality, sort of as best you can measure reality when you're measuring a pension plan, but to make sure that we don't stray too far and keep pulling it back to reality and adjusting the rates every 2 years to make sure things continue as they should. So this is our valuation as of June 30th, 2017. It's 2 years after the first valuation. What we did is we looked at the plan that was adopted 2 years ago, and just sort of for a refresher, that's on page 2, slide 2 of our report. The pension benefit that's provided uses the formula known as 2% times final pay times service payable at 62. This is the formula that was put into law under the PEPRA, the Pension Reform Act of 2013, and it's required for new employees and new plans starting after that date. So the district really didn't have too much of an option about benefit formulas. So you use the required pension formula. It looks at service with the district. Employees were offered a one-time option to go back and buy the credit for their past service by paying the true full actuarial cost of that service. And some employees did accept that option and paid a fair amount of money into the plan. So it's got way more assets than it would have otherwise. And in exchange, those employees were given service credit for the amount of time they purchased. And then, as required by the law, employees are paying 1/2 of the normal cost of the plan. And that gets a little bit complicated, so we'll talk about that in more detail later. In terms of number of participants, we have actually on the valuation date, which was June 30th, there were 8 employees because we had sort of a overlap during a transition period, so there were 8 employees in the valuation. And there's 1 retiree now under the pension plan. So that's kind of exciting. In terms of the assumptions we use in the valuation, what we're doing is we're trying to look at the people working here now and say, what are the pensions they're going to get in the future? And how much is that worth now? So we need to make assumptions about how long people will live here, will work here, what kind of pay raises they'll get, when they'll retire, and once they retire, how long they're going to live. So those are all things that we can't know in advance, but we make assumptions about them. And the assumptions we use in this valuation are based on the ones used by CalPERS, because CalPERS spends a lot of time and effort studying the behavior patterns of public employees in California. And if we study, your 7 employees for 2 years, it's not going to tell us very much. They study lots and lots of people. And so we use the rates that they have determined based on their investigations. The one big assumption that we used that's not from CalPERS was the expected rate of return of funds invested. You are in the PARS moderate plan? PARS Capital Appreciation Plan, which is a fairly moderate mix of assets. And we've assumed that that fund will earn 6.5% every year. Okay. That's pretty much all to say about the assumptions. So we did the calculations based on data about the participants that we were given, their ages and service, their salaries, the pension amount for the pensioner. And what we calculated was that the value of benefits earned to date for all the people in the plan is $455,000. Now, if you were here 2 years ago when the plan began, it began with nothing. You might wonder how we got up to owing $455,000 right away. And that's because of the service that was purchased by employees. So that added to their service credit, added to the liabilities. The assets of the plan as June 30th are $527,000. And again, much more than you might have expected because those employees who purchased service paid for that service up front, the full cost value of that service. So actually, right at June 30th, there's a surplus in the plan of $71,000, partly because of the money employees paid to purchase the service and partly because the investment return for the year ending June 30th, 2017 was very good. It was a good 12-month period by and large for just about everybody. Okay, so what does that mean for this plan? The first thing we're required to do under the state law is determine what the required contribution rate for employees is. Employees are supposed to pay half of the normal cost of the plan, and there's some very specific rounding rules for how you calculate that. So we calculated that what they ought to pay is 7.76% of pay limited by the PEPRA rules, and only base pay, no overtime, very specific rules about what kind of pay you can count. So they should have paid 7.76% of pay. Due to rounding rules, they pay 7.75% of pay. And that would be going forward from when that rate is implemented until the next time we do evaluation. The employer would then pay the remainder of the cost. And for the employer cost, we've, rather than calculating it based on the PEPRA limited pay, the very restricted pay, we calculate it as a percent of total payroll. To make it a little bit easier, this is the same basis you would use for calculating, say, Medicare contributions and things like that. And on that basis, it's 6.92% of total payroll. So even though those percentages are different, they're going to come out to almost the same dollars paid by employees and the employer. Now, the other thing you might ask is, why are we making contributions to the plan if it has a surplus of $76,000 right now? And the answer is that this was another change made by the PEPRA, the Public Employees Law of 2013. You go back in history, all the way back into about the year 2000. At that point, most of the CalPERS plans and other public plans were very well funded, sort of 150% funded. They made a few bad decisions at that point. But one of the decisions that turned out to be not so good was to say that once your plan became fully funded, you could stop making contributions to it. So at that point, people stopped making contributions. The economy sort of crashed in 2008 and 2009. Plans lost a lot of assets, and now they're very poorly funded by and large. And so when you kind of look back and say, what did we do wrong? We say one of the things we did wrong was say people could stop making payments to the plan. So this new law has said that you need to keep funding the plan even though there's more than enough assets in it. So that's why you're still required to make the employer and the employee contributions this year, even though it is in a surplus position. That will give you a good cushion for should you have a bad investment year next year or the year after that. And with that, that is the end of my report on the valuation. There is nothing particularly exciting here, which is really great news for you. The plan did very well over the past 2 years, and you're in really good shape.
So the action we need to take is what?
So the recommendation, staff recommendation is to essentially authorize me to adjust the employer contribution to 6.92% and the employee contribution to 7.75% going forward.
That's the action, is to change the contribution of both the employees and employers.
That's the action.
Okay, do we have more discussion?
Yeah, a question. We started off with a discount rate of 6.5%. As part of this actuarial analysis, did you review that to see if you felt that that was still suitable?
Yes, we did. We have a little bit of analysis on that on page 8.
Okay.
And it kind of comes down to what you assume the administrative expenses of the fund are going to be. But we thought that a discount rate anywhere between 6.2 and 6.7 would be appropriate, and 6.5 is right in the middle.
So it's your feeling that as far as managing this, we've got that pretty well nailed down?
Yes.
Okay, and so that the only thing we're talking about is adjusting the employee down and the employer up.
Right.
The actual contribution still stays pretty much the same.
Yeah, and the total dollars that are being paid are not that different.
Right. So this is basically, I think, what was it, $2,800 decision?
Yes.
And is there really any decision to be made, or is this ordained that we have to do this?
So for the employer contribution, as far as I know, there is no legal requirement that you have to pay that. I'm not sure what the agreement with PARS is.
Okay.
The employees, I believe, are required to make their share of the contribution, so it does seem like it really is the right thing to do to adjust that to the proper level.
Right. And actually, if that's the way it was originally set up, was closer to this formula that you're proposing now than what we actually started off with.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it was supposed to be 50/50, and if I understand it
Yeah.
correctly. We might have not done it quite correctly at the outset, so.
But it's right now, and what you should expect, especially with a small group of people, if you have people leaving and new people coming in, averages don't stay the same, right? It's really easy to change averages of your group, and so you should really expect that every 2 years the rates are gonna change. Yeah, it's gonna be very hard to keep them stable. If you had a very large group, they would stay more stable.
Yeah.
Jim?
Could you explain on page 8, just for clarification, so the rate of return was 6 point,
The,
the rate we got on our.
the rate you actually got, I'm sorry, I don't think I wrote down, do you know what the rate was?
The actual rate of return,
Here-
no, not
You know,
calculated as
I
a-
don't think I put it in the report and I'd forgotten, but
$55,000.
Do you have an idea what the percent rate, but this says 6 point,
this is, page 8 is expected for the future.
this is expected,
Yeah.
you know what it was for the last, you said,
That's what it-
you said for the last year it was really good, did you know?
I
You must-
know
you
it
must
was
have an
more
idea.
than, I know it was more than 6.5, but I didn't write the number down, and, you know, if I sat in the corner for half an hour, I could figure it
Okay,
out,
so
but I
it's
don't
the-
it's
remember.
more than 6.5.
It was more than 6.5.
Is the consent agenda report gonna help us with 3 months and 1 year snapshot?
Yeah, if you go to page 9, the very next page, that page discusses what the actual net investment income was, and the calculation can be made from that page.
Right. You're in $55,000
Okay,
on.
so it was, but it was more than 6.5, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And we have a surplus, so the number there has to be several instances.
And it was greater than 6.5 net of expenses.
Yes.
And just one more question, what is the confidence level, 50%, what does that mean?
Okay, so,
Or I just,
When we
page 8.
model what we expect the rate of return to be, we use probability functions that tell us, so we look at the kind of things PARS is invested in, so they're 75% equity, 20% fixed income, 5% cash. So we have assumptions that tell us that, I'm gonna make this up. The rate of return, the real rate of return on equities is 6%, but there's a standard deviation of probably 8% on that. So, and then fixed income is a much lower rate of return, a much smaller standard deviation, and I'm sorry, I'm talking with probability numbers. But you essentially run these 1,000 trials of modeling to say, how do the probabilities interact? And so what you get is 1,000 different rates of return that it could be. And so what we say was, what's the median, what's the 50th percentile of all those possible rates of return we
So
could
why are they
get?
250%?
So in both cases, the 50th percentile rate is 7.01%. But then you have to subtract out of that.
You said both cases.
So both columns,
Yeah.
both that say 50%. We always got, is the 50th percentile, 7.01%. But then we needed to subtract out of that investment expenses. Because you really need the net rate of
So,
return.
but why are there 2 columns?
Okay, because there's 2 different investment expenses.
It's mainly the expenses.
So PARS had told us, based on the schedules we had last year, we thought it was like 80 basis points. Normally, our firm's assumption for a fairly passive portfolio is about 30 basis points for expenses. And it may depend on the size of the fund. So we did it both ways. We said, what if it really is 80 basis points of expenses? Then your net return would be 6.2. And then what if it really is only 30 basis points? Then your net return would be 6.75.
Okay.
And the 6.5 was right between those two numbers, so we feel very comfortable with that.
And then my last question for my turn is, so you do, So you're Mary Elizabeth, right?
Yes.
Okay, so, and so you have the actuary certification. So just in the layman's term, we're on course for this district to be able to fund this. We're not getting into unfunded liability issues. We're
No.
on course, correct?
No, you are doing great.
Okay.
We have a surplus actually. from the library.
Right, you should, I think you,
Well, we shouldn't be
I'm not
too
sure if you
complacent
should brag
that
about it
surplus.
or keep
Yeah,
it
we-
quiet
no.
because everyone's gonna be too jealous.
Okay.
Catherine?
We're lucky the market's doing so well this last year.
You had, it's actually excellent timing for when all the money went into your fund.
Yes, we're very lucky.
Anything else?
Nope.
Just that we're lucky to take a look. Okay, so any other questions? Otherwise, we need a motion to authorize the manager to adjust the employee employee rates as presented.
I'll make the motion.
Can we have a second, please?
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Catherine?
Aye.
Passes 4-0. Thank you very much for a very
Thank you.
clear presentation. Sometimes putting that in English is not easy. The second new business is review and possible action concerning revision of the standard sewer specifications. I'm sure that's not the financial people, though.
Yeah, thanks, Dwight. And I'm going to keep this very short because I'm going to hand this over to Pippin. We have, I think, some exciting news. The standard sewer specifications are revised on, in regular intervals whenever we see that there is need to tighten our rules and regs a little bit. But this time, I think we actually are also going to announce something that will benefit people in the district, and that is really that for mainline projects, for mainline replacement projects, the district so far replaced the lower lateral, and I think if we extend this benefit to the homeowners a little bit by essentially allowing the placement of the clean out somewhere else besides the property line, then we can actually replace a larger section of the private lateral, which is going to help the district by reducing the I&I, and it's going to help the homeowners that are lucky enough to live on a street where a sewer replacement project happens. With that, Pippin is going to tell us exactly what the details are that are going to be changed in the standard specifications.
And I have a question, maybe you can answer it when you're talking, but that is, when we were replacing laterals in the past, what on average was the condition of the laterals?
Very good question, and aptly timed. Let me start by handing out this document. Thank you, Clemens. I have 2 copies here for viewing of the board and the public, and I'm handing you 2 parts. I'll explain why they're 2 parts. The second part is a repeat of some of what's in the base document there. This is the guide that is published online, so when a contractor refers to the district, how do we build our sewer systems, what standards do we use, and so forth. We have a document that starts out based on standard plumbing practices, standard plumbing code. It isn't a rubber stamping of the California building codes, plumbing codes exactly though, because the district here we have special requirements, special needs because of our geography and our district policies and goals, trying to gradually work towards better than being at the state average, you might say, for I&I, infiltration from rainwater. The district has averaged, a lot of these pipes are, excuse me, particularly in Montara, on the order of 60 or more years old. Some predate the formation of the district. There might have been pipes that went to a septic tank that was then extended out to a district sewer. Much of the district, started being sewered in the 50s, and while some individual houses and neighborhoods were built more recently, we find even some of those contractor-built pipes that are built out of plastic, which was a big improvement at the time, was a fairly light-duty plastic, and now that's been in service, say,
went in 1980s. We're now looking at 20 to 30 years old for some of that early plastic, and it's showing signs of stress and failure in several locations. So with that kind of history, this document is something we kind of add to, and it's a basis for how we design our
The
projects.
houses in our area had clay.
Yeah, clay is your most common. Now, we have some other historical pipes which are well worse than clay. Orangeburg is rolled up tar paper. Transite, which is an asbestos concrete pipe material, was fairly sound when it's good, but when it deteriorates, it turns to mush, effectively, like fibers and disintegrates. So with that, we have a little bit of history, of course, working with our partner in the JPA, SAM, there's always a discussion with the infiltration and rain. That's a state question now, what are districts doing? There's not a requirement for the district's discharge permit, if you will, to be a sanitary district to do something with private laterals. But the state's asking a lot of questions. Do you guys have an ordinance? This is not just our district, this is a statewide. They recognize a lot of rainwater gets in laterals, and a lot of sewer spills happen on laterals. Many times more in number and in volume than some of the better managed districts in terms of district sewers. So we have now maybe several years, 3 to 5 years in Marin County, as our company has experience with, and a few more years than that in East Bay Mud, where dissent decrees for districts that have had repeated overflow violations have encouraged districts to implement lateral ordinances. And we've even discussed it here at this board. What would it be to implement an ordinance that has trigger points? The most stringent trigger point being some ordinances say if the district performs a capital project, they knock on the homeowner door and say, you're responsible now, this moment, and in the next 30 days, to televise your sewer and find out if it's good, and you have 180 days to make any repairs discovered. And that's fairly intrusive in a community to approach it that way. It's fairly intensive at the district level for management. And we're finding that the effort and cost that the district's putting in for staff time, for engineering consulting, and all this to follow through with the reviews of the videos and the enforcement, that the actions are actually performed by the homeowners to replace their pipes and make needed repairs and witness those repairs in the field. It's significant enough a cost that it starts to equal the incremental increase in cost to just extending our capital project a few extra feet. So for a number of years now, we've had a policy of here in Montara to replace the laterals with the main line, particularly on the pipe burst project. It's been a district option, not a requirement, but it's been a policy. So anytime we do a capital project, we, particularly pipe bursting, will try to identify that lateral up at the property line and replace the lower portion in the street, with the thought that it helps avoid the homeowner having to deal with encroachment permits, and we can start reducing problem pipes, I&I reduction, and overflows. So now, with a bit of history, we've probably replaced, I don't remember the exact number of capital laterals off the top of my head, but it's several hundred, in the order of, say, 400 or more lower laterals. And we have about 90 lateral permits, repairs, or replacements on file through other sources, new construction, remodels, and so forth. So looking back, we're thinking, okay, we've implemented repairs on, say, 400 laterals, but we've only affected the repair on half the footage of that pipe. What was the looking back, the incremental cost to go an extra few feet up to someone's house when we already have a hole dug in the street? If we can pipe burst it, it's usually fairly nominal, we've found, over the way the bids have broken down. So our recommendation with the change here is to modify the standard specifications to give the district the option to, in effect, not require the property line clean out in every case to keep the cost lower, and allow the contractor to, if the homeowner is willing to allow us to go on further onto their private property, go up and place a new clean out next to the house and replace that whole lateral in one shot. And so, with that, we are excited to, hope to add that to, the future capital projects when it's, makes sense to do that, which we hope almost every case that would be where it would make sense. And I think that, so if you have any questions on the specifics of that, I think the goal is to really, for a nominal cost, get the pipe in the ground rather than spend it on administration time.
Questions from the group?
Okay, so Pippin, you replaced a main, you replaced the lateral all the way up to the house with a new lateral, and then you put a clean out there, and the only thing that the homeowner is out, let's say they have to get permission to come on to do the work.
Generally, that would be the case. There may be cases where somebody has a fancy landscaping plan, and so we would, generally we're able to have the contractor view the site pre-bid and include adequate repairs in his price. And when you're doing a large volume, usually those prices smooth out. So maybe one patio is concrete and one's stepping stones. The concrete might cost more. Sometimes homeowners might object to us cutting into their concrete patio, for example. So with this program being a little bit more voluntary, I think we have some flexibility where we can work with the homeowners. We already have in place other triggers through the district's sewer permit requirements that if someone's remodeling or doing a legalization of a second unit or some other substantive fixture unit change at the house, that we can ask them to review their pipe and make sure it's in sound condition and perform a spot repair or something if there's an issue. So I think that in some cases, some homeowners might have to make a choice. Do I want to, have the patio cut? They might say, well, I really don't want to cut it. Could we reroute it? And then the contractor would say, well, that's going to be a change order, so many dollars. And if the homeowner wanted to pay that change order, then an agreement could be worked out. Generally, a positive relationship like that, we're looking at overall cost of the district, the cost of managing bigger pump stations, bigger piping to get it to the treatment plant. Our goal is to keep those peaks, those rain peaks down and further reduce them. So that's our main goal with this change. We have a few other minor changes, including improving and increasing the requirements for pipe materials. We had eliminated in our last iteration ABS pipe, for example, because it's historically been problematic in the field, but we eliminated it from the document. So in recent times, we've gotten in a number of conflicts with plumbers because the county is still allowing it. And since it's more stringent, we chose to bring it back into our document with a specific not allowed statement. So it's very clear that it isn't just an omission. You can't use it.
You have to use PVC instead.
You have to use PVC instead for new construction. And I put a date. I mean, if you put it in now and it's permitted now and it's sealed now, if it's sound and not leaking, we're not going to make you dig it out. But so we put that in really clear to say, hey, just because we didn't mention it doesn't mean, we missed it. So, and I don't know if there was a few little tweaks in the details, which I've listed out here, mostly fairly minor, just clarifications of lateral standards, how we connect to the main, make sure we get a good sound connection there.
So in essence, we're giving a valuable service to our customers without it really costing us much.
Correct. And particularly when we look at the offset of the potential future risk to the district to have a lateral ordinance program either volunteered, by the district or kind of imposed upon the district from the state, preemptively going ahead and having a policy where we're actively addressing private laterals in a way that's economic. We see it's a benefit that will protect the district if future fines are ever assessed the district for spills or something like that.
The secondary benefit is the fact that we have better control over wet weather
Yeah.
inflows.
Yeah, that's an active, and Granada has had a slightly differently worded but similar kind of policy. And I think it's a proactive approach for the district to control what we have control over, and that's the pipes in our district.
Yeah, so Pippin, so the state has set standard on the laterals?
They're trying to. There's no legal requirement for the district to do what we're proposing, but it's been suggested that it's a good idea, and a number of districts are finding that it's economically a good idea because we're seeing benefits in I&I, and it doesn't cost that much more.
Okay, so our district is setting standards.
Yeah, you're leading the standards is what you could say.
Yeah,
Leading the state in that it's the state's asking districts.
East Bay has set standards.
Oh, well, we have
Berkeley and Oakland.
yeah, no, we have a lateral standard, and that's what the second handout that I've included here is basically, I included, so the largest change, I guess you could say, for the spec is that I've pulled the specific detailed lateral standards out as a handout, as an attachment. So when we get a permit, we can hand them rather than the whole binder, we can hand them the thin document that specifically refers to the standards that they have to build the pipe to.
Okay.
And so we have to have a standard as to how the pipes are built,
Right.
but it's not a legal requirement that we make repairs to them, which is what we're proposing.
Yeah, and my next question is, so does the district have the power at any point to demand that all people, all homeowners and businesses comply? Or this is strictly still
This is still voluntary. We would have to go, I think, to a formal resolution with a lateral ordinance setting those trigger points where people would have to comply.
Can a district demand that all its businesses and homeowners comply?
Yes.
And then my other question is, if so by getting rid of the clean out at the property line, does that affect the having appropriate access to the main? By just having the clean out of the house?
Yeah,
Does that decrease the accessibility to the main, cause a problem?
That's a good question. I think we would still put in, there's still standards of how often we would want to have cleanouts. So if there are other criteria in the specs that says your pipe is over a certain length or has a certain number of bends, what we did is we made that clean out the property line optional. So the district doesn't have to put it in. And that saves about $800 to the district each time we would go to upgrade an upper lateral, because we'd only have to dig 2 holes instead of 3. So that extra hole that we have to pay somebody to dig down and the parts to put in there can be $800 to $1,200. So by making that optional or as needed, we have the option to discount that and still affect a much longer
If
repair.
it is needed for a particular house.
Yeah, we would
the
still put,
district
we'd still put it in,
pays-
yeah,
would
absolutely,
pay
yeah.
for
It makes it
It
optional.
depends the length of it.
And the homeowner would be given the same benefit. So a pipe burst pipe from the house to the main that a homeowner chooses to do on their own. We have had, the current standard says they have to install this property line cleanout. So they have to do 3 holes. And that's a cost burden that other districts have decided to eliminate, and so we're following suit in that.
Okay.
So, again, if it's a really long, or there's a bend, we would still require cleanout
Okay.
based on other
And
standards.
then I'm sorry, my next question
Yeah.
is, my particular lateral was replaced 2.5 years ago, along with the main, and I took advantage of those guys doing it. But that was PVC, right?
That was HDPE, which is another very high-quality pipe.
Okay.
The 2 highest quality pipes considered in the industry are the high-density polyethylene and the PVC, which we specify, which is equal to water grade, water pipe grade.
But the one that was put in.
That would have been,
up and down my street,
HDPE,
was a-
yeah.
was a good
High-density polyethylene, and
And
it's
then my last
expected
question.
less, 50 years or more, yeah.
My last question is,
Thanks.
my last question is, you referred to the fact of different kinds of old laterals, and you mentioned asbestos cement pipe turning into mush. Maybe Clemens and you could both answer this. That doesn't apply, that issue doesn't apply to a lot of our mains that are asbestos cement pipe.
The sewer mains or the water
The water
mains?
The
mains?
water mains.
No, different
Why-
chemistry.
Why is that?
Hydrogen sulfide attack is the usual cause for those, when they get dry.
Oh, it's just water.
It's because you're in when you're in a, environment where it goes from moist to dry, you have oxygen.
Mhm.
And between the hydrogen sulfide attack and the oxidation, you get blisters that form inside the pipe. So,
Okay.
correct me if I'm wrong, Clemens, generally, water pipe, the wetter that the AC pipe stays, the better it lasts.
Okay.
East Bay Mud's water pipe failures in AC are typically on the east side of the district, which is the arid side. The more wetter side, the AC pipe holds up
Yes, so,
longer.
Really?
so the pressurized water pipeline AC pipes are lasting very long, but it is true that ultimately the problem is that they're turning also, that they're becoming soft.
Yeah.
Okay.
So at one
Yeah.
point, we will have to replace those, like we have to replace any pipe. And
But-
the type of failure that you see with AC pipe is that they turn soft.
Asbestos cement. But, so that's the water mains. And you watch those as you repair them bit by bit, you keep track of
Yes.
the quality. And-
Yes.
And then the asbestos particles in the water.
Yeah, so
and
we have very little failure on asbestos cement pipe. I mean, it's the fittings that are attached, the
Yeah.
saddles, for example,
So,
that fail. But the actual pipes that are usually from the 70s are still in very good shape.
I know, I'm sorry, one more question. Other districts use pressure testing sometimes for larger developments and multiple units. We would never need to do that, because we don't have that big of multiple developments, correct?
Some districts are even trying to implement lateral ordinances that require homeowners to pressure test their existing laterals.
Which, if it's clay, it would just blow it
It's,
out.
yeah, it's very difficult to implement that standard, but it is a standard some districts are trying to hold.
Trying to.
Yeah, and so,
But now we do apply air
oh,
test.
we do, on new construction, we absolutely do use an air test.
You do an air test?
Yeah, on all new construction, you can do a hydrostatic water test or an air test equal to between 3.5 and 4 pounds pressure, unless it's a large diameter sewer, we use plain water pressure.
But the pressure testing exposes the
Yeah.
interior,
Yeah.
obviously.
So
but-
generally, the older pipes don't pass, and that's pretty well known, although there are occasions where they can.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
You're very welcome, Jim. I just don't want to have you push that 50-year limit, that's my only point. Catherine?
I don't think I will.
Have we been in, because the water board is looking at all three agencies as well as SAM, and so we've been in discussion with the water board about this? Or we're just going to
I'm
give
not-
them a happy surprise?
Yeah, I'm,
Sewer board meeting.
no, this
No,
is
water
not,
board.
this
The
is
water-
not,
Regional water
Oh,
quality.
regional water,
control.
okay.
Yeah.
this action Clemens chose to do is not coming by any prompting from the water board. This is a good policy for the district's management. The water board staff asked general questions and did at our audit meeting. Do you have an active ordinance? What do you guys do to help homeowners, or what oversight do you have of homeowners' laterals? And we've had those general discussions, but there have not been any specific questions or requirements coming from the water board.
I think it's good policy, and it's something Scott and I and Paul had been interested in for many, many years. So I congratulate you guys for finding a way to get this done. This is good. With the water, the AC pipe, what was the estimate? It sounds like the estimated lifespan for it when it was installed was like 40 years? 50
For,
years?
for ACP?
Yeah.
I would,
This is
I
a
would make,
water
I would make,
system.
water,
This is water.
the
not
water
sewer.
pipes?
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know that?
Well, I would make one general engineering assumption if you go back a number of years ago, that assumptions were typically made on a 20 to 30 year, maybe 40-year design life.
Okay.
It was kind of standard practice. And I think now we're at the point where we've exceeded those design lives for a lot of our infrastructure, and we have a delayed catch-up cost, and we're looking very seriously at products that have a much extended life past that. So we push those limits of materials as much as we can to try to make, 30, 40 years the minimum life, when we would like to see twice that or 3 times that when possible.
Well, I would like to see a article to the review, an interview with Karina. I was talking to a knowledgeable Half Moon Bay citizen last night, and the rumor mill in Half Moon Bay is that Montara and Granada have done nothing, as in zero, over the years to limit I&I. And this was coming from somebody with connections to people who are making decisions based on perhaps bad information. And I would like for us to take this ordinance, or this resolution that we're passing, I'm assuming, to get it into the paper to let a whole lot of people know that Montara, and probably Granada, are taking active steps, and have been taking active steps. I think we need to talk about our history of replacing mains and replacing laterals.
And we have on a continuous basis, I have to pull out the articles, this was many times in the review, how we increased our mainline replacement project, at least in the past 8 years.
Yes.
We've had every single year a mainline replacement project, so we doubled our efforts really.
Yeah, I think we had a graph I put together because of the pipe ages tables now we have in the GIS. You can see very nicely. Some of those graphs may have been in the SSMP, but they're independently
No.
available for a discussion like this.
I don't have that data.
Yeah, that basically.
And I would love to distribute it to some of my friends.
The quick summary is that in the last decade, in the last decade, the replacement rate in Montara is very good, and it's twice the previous decade in terms of
Right.
rate of replacement.
And we have had, when the economy was, when construction was inexpensive, not that long ago, we doubled the amount of pipe. So we have done a whole lot in that regard. But like they say, I was,
Flabbergasted.
not even surprised by the lack of information. And given the water board issues and all of these, I think we need to praise ourselves and give ourselves the credit that we deserve.
And with that, can we have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
All in favor?
Aye.
4-0. Very
Pippin,
nice.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Clemens, thank you very, very much
Thank you.
for pursuing this.
Okay, next item, which affect the next 2 items, will be very quick ones. Item 3 is review and possible action concerning appointment of board officers and committee assignments for 2018. I don't know if you got the memo out, but our recommendation is to defer that to our January 4th meeting when everyone's here.
Good idea.
And so therefore, there will be no action tonight, unless there's really Ralph on energy otherwise. And then number 4 is review and possible action concerning cancellation next regular scheduled meeting of December 21st, which, Clemens, you tell me there's not a whole lot we're gonna do. So.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, the staff report reads different. I had planned to cancel the January 4 meeting. It's now obvious that we're going to hold the January 4 meeting and cancel the next meeting, which is December 21st.
It's fine. You queried the board, and we're okay.
Good, that's our granddaughter's
Yes.
birthday.
Are we okay, Jim?
We're okay?
Okay, I just checked.
I responded.
Okay, reports, Sam, it says Scott is not here, so Catherine, our, understanding has had a meeting today, so.
We did, and Bill was there,
Yeah.
thank you very much, Bill. And Clemens was there, thank you very much, Clemens. Let me see, we had a report on our last SAM board meeting, which was November 15, so I won't bother you with that one. But the one today was a special meeting. Next regularly scheduled meeting will be on Monday night. But last week, Thursday, I'm not good on days, I'm sorry.
Thursday it was.
It was Thursday, we had I will call it a technical difficulty, which is like a total meltdown of the,
Literally.
Yeah.
literally, of the power supply to the plant. Fortunately, one or two of the crew noticed the smoke, and so they were able to get the generator there and get it up and running. And so it has been investigated. It was investigated by the SAM engineer, the consulting engineer, the Calcon electrical engineers came out and looked at it and gave advice over the last few days. And so the meeting today was to discuss the damage and to declare an emergency and to approve the work and the parts. And the total bill is going to be about $490,000.
$500,000.
Yeah, $500,000. I went out and looked at it on Saturday. There was a finance committee meeting for SAM, and I wanted to attend it, and so we had a tour of the electrical system. It was thought at the time that we might be able to go from this system called bus bar to more of a cable, but there's too much power required by the plant. The generator that they are using at the plant to run the plant is 8,000
800 kilowatts,
kilowatts, yeah.
or what's the other one that's close? Kilowatts or,
Another number just to,
I'm so bad with that.
yeah, another number to get something that people might recognize to the breaker on their house, which is say 30 amps at 220 volts. This is like 3,000 amps at 480 volts, so it's like 100 times more power than the average house to run the plant.
Yeah, it's about the size of a small railroad engine.
So this was another one of these delayed maintenance issues that flew up in the face and so.
Yes, in 2009, SAM had a review by SRT of what the potential problems were, time limits, items that needed attention. This one, the electrical and the generator were number one as needing attention. There came in yet another interim general manager who decided to do her own list. And even at that, this one came in as number 10. But with financial issues and revolving general managers and other things needing attention to, staff issues and so on, those have not really been paid, those lists have not really been paid attention to. And another one of the items that was, other items that were on the list were, for instance, the pressure the PV pressure relief valves. And those have not been attended to. And so we've been suffering perhaps spills, probably spills from that. Pipelines that needed to be replaced have rotted away, and that's the pipelines that you see being replaced now. Those have not been replaced because we couldn't agree on the language and who was responsible for it, and we'll be talking about that in closed session, I guess. But there's just so many little points of why things haven't been done, and essentially, we have parts of this plant are 40 years old, other parts are 20 years old, and again, with the revolving managers and the problems with finance and getting consensus and so on, the problems are coming home. And it's going to be very, very expensive. Had we been taking care of these when the economy was down, we could have gotten a lot more done.
Even if the economy wasn't down, for instance, the problem with right now is you got a $90,000 figure just for emergency generators. You got a $50,000 fee just for fuel. That you also, your material acquisition costs, couldn't have picked a worse time to do that, because the fact that every manufacturer is pushed to the limit to take care of the problems that happen in Texas and Puerto Rico, et cetera, in the last 6 months.
Well, and there are only 2 or maybe 3 manufacturers of this particular equipment. It's used for data centers. It's used for very high power need facilities, but there aren't a whole lot of those. And so we are at the point now where we have to just
buy our way out of it.
do it. We have to do it, and to give Calcon a pat on the back. They pulled strings so we could get the pieces that we need in 15 days. Because we would otherwise be in line behind Puerto Rico, Texas, Florida, the fireplaces, and the burning places in California. We would be way behind, and we've got to get this done now. We have been economizing on staff, which is good when everything's working, but when something like this doesn't work, and now the valves, and I'm not sure, the switches need to be turned by hand in the plant, so we have to have somebody in the plant 24 hours a day. And we have people pulling 12-hour shifts. We are so lucky as Montara as a district, and the coast side for the dedication of the staff to be willing to do that. The engineer, Keishan, came in today in jeans and a baseball cap. Actually, he'd been out, he can actually, I was teasing him, I said, he can actually knows how to use a screwdriver. I've met engineers who are not real well versed on the finer points of screwdrivers and wrenches and things. So everybody has been pulling their weight. And so it was approved. It's going to be expensive. We're on a very short timeline, and the process, given the time and the stress and so on, may not have been perfect. I think at some point that's going to be a serious discussion that we're going to have. But for the meeting today, it is. We are on the track to getting this fixed, but we are in the middle of the holiday season, and we can only be thankful that there's no rain right now.
I think I want to add 2 points to this real briefly. I think it's important to highlight that the plant is currently running on generator and is going to stay on generator for the next weeks until this is fixed. Right? This is really what the problem is.
And generators aren't good.
generators on, but there is a backup generator on site. So there's 2 generators, so hopefully, everything will work out. And the second that I want to point out is, this is the classic example of a project that probably would have cost half if it would have been scheduled instead of now this emergency. But there would not have been the need for, additional staff time, generator.
That's
This
right.
could have simply been, plumbed, however electricians call their line pulling, and switched over without a whole lot of additional costs that we run into right now.
And let me look up I apologize for not having it pulled up, but the agenda for, Monday.
It was mainly closed session from my side.
There's a lot of closed session, and,
Did it go out already?
Yeah, it came out today.
it came out today, and,
I saw mainly closed session.
oh, I know, the other issue that we have going on at SAM, and I asked to have it on the agenda, is the collections contracts. Half Moon Bay has been unwilling to commit to having collections service next year. That will affect the budgets of SAM because there is some crossover, some benefit to having collection systems. People can work, for instance, in the plant, doing plant-based things when they're, and vice versa, when needed, and when there is a emergency, like when we had the leaks earlier in the year, everybody could work on that. If Half Moon Bay doesn't participate in the collection system, we're going to have to lose some positions. The insecurity of knowing whether Half Moon Bay will or will not has led to one of our collections workers leaving. And the board has not decided to replace him because we don't know if we're going to have the agreement and the need for that number of workers. So that's the discussion that we are going to have on Monday, is going to be about the budget and about the impact of the collections and the treatment plant system. Scott and I have been discussing this, and we have said that, that Montara needs the collection system. Whether we choose to go off on another way or not in the future, we need to do it. And Renata has said the same thing. The question that maybe this board will want to form a committee, or maybe not, in January, is to talk about our future plans for collection system, and look at this and see where we're going, and try and anticipate where SAM is going, because this is a problem. The year-to-year contract is no longer working. People need greater job security. The demands on sewer systems and sanitation districts are so much higher than when SAM was created, and those were much higher than when our districts were created. So we need to be looking at what works best for our districts and for SAM and for the public health of the coast side. And how that, and of course that all comes down to money. So that's going to be the major item. It may be, depending on what Half Moon Bay decides, a very short item. We don't know.
All right, let's move us along. How about the Midcoast Council?
Nothing to report.
Okay, CSDA,
Nothing, no meetings.
Attorney's report?
You may have heard or read that the case coming out of Supreme Court, in the case of Ventura, the United Water Conservation District, Supreme Court upheld the imposition of a water extraction charge or pumping charge under specific provisions of the water code that pertain to water conservation districts. And the issue was, well, the charge that was imposed was on residential property or non-agricultural property, 3 times the amount of the charge on agricultural pumping. And the Supreme Court held that that charge is not a property-related charge under Proposition 218, but remanded it to the trial court for determination as to whether or not the charge, the differential between non-agricultural and agricultural is reasonable and based on a cost or benefit analysis, the benefit being the conservation uses to which the charge is imposed. It's an interesting case from our standpoint in the sense that it gives a good review of the status of Proposition 218 cases. As you know, we do not impose, this district does not impose a pumping charge at this time. Just for information.
Thank you, Dave. Director's report, anybody? Clemens?
Yeah, I think I can report that, the president, Dwight, and myself were actually at the Association of California Water Agency meeting last week. And I think the one thing that we can report is that the state is, I think, very busy with some very large things like the Oroville Dam and others. So there are some interesting, whole Delta politics, of course, are heating up again. And so I think we're in a very special situation and fairly blessed that we're somewhat removed from this, from these discussions. So being the disadvantage that we saw of being isolated and having to rely on our own sources turned into a really very big advantage for the district. So.
A lot of money up in that valley with the waters.
Yes.
A lot of money, a lot of players. It's interesting if you, the California water rights and how they were instituted, and the primary rights and secondary rights. It's quite a system. Anything else? So we're going to go in closed session. We are done for the camera. And so we'll take a 10-minute break. And